Hello everyone, my name is Dixon Jones and I'm going to be talking to you today about entities and entity SEO. And I think it's a really important topic. My name is Dixon Jones. I am the CEO of a company called Inlinks.net, and you may know me because I had a previous life as the marketing director of Majestic.com. If you want the presentation today, email talk@dixonjones.com with the word entity in the title, and I'll do my best to get it across to you, although as you'll find out it's not your standard PowerPoint presentation. So I want to start with asking, what is an entity to Google and where are they used? I think that a lot of us in the world of internet marketing still think in terms of keywords and phrases and that sort of thing, and that's a mistake, as we're going to find out. Topics technically are named entity or recognizing named entities. Really what Google means by this is an entity as a topic. For want of a better word, an entity is something that can be described in an encyclopedia, like Wikipedia. And in fact, Wikipedia becomes a very important piece of kit for us when doing entity SEO. So Google refers to the concept of topics within its own domain rather than the word entity. But essentially, an entity is any item that we can extract out of a piece of text that refers to a specific idea, concept, person, event, organization, whatever it may be. So where is it used? Well, in Google they use it everywhere, and you can see it, for example, in Google Trends. If you go into Google Trends and you start typing in a keyword, then you can see that sometimes they're not bringing back information on search terms, they're bringing back information on topics or entities, and that's a very visible way of seeing Google's use of topics. You can also, of course, see topics in the knowledge panel. Every time you find a knowledge panel on Google search results, that essentially is a topic or a series of topics that are connected together that Google is understanding and then displaying for us as users. And it uses in things like Google's Discover tool on Android. You can see how they're bringing up things like, in this example, hiking as a topic, because they know that you're interested in hiking, and therefore they're bringing you information. And you can also see topics and entities described in Google's NLP API, and much more about that in a little bit. So why the drive by Google over the last 5 years or so towards this topic approach, towards indexing and information retrieval? Well, remember that Google's job is to organize the world's information. It's not necessarily to bring back your web page. And so one of the things that a topic-based approach allows Google to do is it allows it to come up with a single point of truth. So if you see the top line of this chart, the blue pages there, imagine those as all the web pages on the internet. What they could do before is they had all those pages on the internet, and they tried to index all of those pages and send people out to those pages. So they were treating a page as an idea. But what they can do now is say, right, well, if we're going to why don't we bring all the ideas from those pages into a single point of truth? And if we do that and we store a single point of truth locally at Google, at the Googleplex, I mean that pretty much literally, then we can also do things like bring in other information from other sources, for example, music lyrics, or manually bring in data, or bring in internal data and data from other sources that are not on the internet. So having a single point of truth solves a whole load of problems for a search engine that's trying to find meaning in a otherwise disconnected and disorganized world. But there's also a money imperative as well, because it fixes a scale problem that Google has by indexing pages. So if you see this diagram here and imagine that this is, a whole list of URLs, every single URL on the internet, and then the text in those URLs which talk about different ideas or different topics. The problem is that if Google stores every single URL and tries to index all of those URLs and do an information retrieval system based on those, then there's many different ideas inside each URL. Whereas if you plot all those ideas or topics into separate units within a database, then an entity-based index reduces the record size dramatically. It does, however, lose a little bit of diversity and nuance, but it ultimately reduces the size of the index from trillions of records to billions or hundreds of billions of records, which is a massive reduction given the amount of data that we're now having to work with. And of course, the number of pages on the internet may carry on to infinity, but probably the number of ideas that we're thinking about as human beings will not. So there will be a limit to the number of ideas that are out there. And then one thing that we've discovered really recently at Inlinks is that it probably has an amazing advantage in trying to get information out across different languages as well, because a topic-based approach happens to be language agnostic. So if you start with 100 pages about a given topic that's independently written in 100 different languages, then it's very hard to disambiguate and cross-reference all of the meaning within all of that content. However, if you've got everything organized in ideas, it's quite easy to suddenly translate that information on the fly out into 100 different languages. So one of the great things about an entity-based approach is it's language agnostic, and that's going to allow ultimately Google to scale across the world more effectively than language by language. So how do we use this as SEOs? Well, Google has given us an NLP API that talks about entities, and we can examine entities using Google's NLP API. And it's a start, and it's available on the web, and there's an interface on the web, and this is the output of a piece of text that we put into Google's web interface, which is free to use for Google NLP's API. The problem is it's not enough for us as SEOs to use this, and a lot of tools have started to use it, but it's not enough on its own. So if you have a look at this output here from a piece of text, one of the main mistakes that we've seen people making is that they think that there's 10 entities listed in this piece of content. But if you have a look a little bit more clearly, you've got actually things like expert listed 3 times there, and you've got basketball shoes and best basketball shoes. Now, best basketball shoes, if you think about it, is not an entity. There is no thing called best basketball shoe. There is no agreed concept of best basketball shoe. In fact, in this output, we put it to you that there is only one clear entity listed here, and that's the Nike, because it has a Wikipedia article associated and pointed to by the NLP API. So the question then becomes for SEOs, how do we compare the number of entities that are in a body of content against the number of entities that Google says is in a body of content? And this is something that we've been working on over the last year or so. And what we've been doing every week is we've been having a look industry by industry, or search term by search term, and compiling a database where we've been looking at a body of text for the top 10 results in any given keyword, analyzing that text and extracting all the underlying entities that we see in our own natural language processing algorithm, and then comparing it to the number of entities that Google reports in their NLP algorithm. And by reporting, I mean identifies a specific Wikipedia URL as an entity. And we found in the UK, in English, that on average, they're only picking up 16 or 16.2%, or they're only reporting 16.2% of the entities that are actually in a body of content. Now, I think that this is a really interesting piece of work for us to have done. Not many people picked up on it at the time, but it has allowed us to understand what it is we need to do as search optimizers, because this doesn't turn into just a theoretical piece of work. This turns into a very, very practical piece of work and has some very, very practical applications, because we can then turn that into creating a topic chart, for example, and we can start to see where we've got missing topics. So this, I'm sorry about the slight blurriness of this if it's coming across on your screen. It's not your internet connection, it's my image here, but this is a small part of a topic chart that we create. So this is a knowledge graph of actually a very well-known SEO tool, and what we do is we analyze that content and we run our own API and Google's NLP API, and we can start to pick out all the topics that Google has understood, and they're the ones with green text, which you can just about see. And then we can also see the topics that we have understood, but Google hasn't. So we can immediately see here, within the context of marketing and advertising, or within the context of countries, or within different verticals, we can see what content we're now missing that Google has not picked up. And that allows us to really start to work on ways to make Google better understand the entities that we think are important. So this has led us to the concept of search engine understanding. So search engine understanding, or SEU, is I guess that's our Inlinks' new three-letter abbreviation, but essentially it's the number of entities that Google reports in a given body of text divided by the number of entities that are actually in a body of text. And I think that this is the new challenge for SEOs, to help machines understand the underlying concepts. So the question here is, how can this particular website start explaining to Google that this is about content marketing or inbound marketing, if it thinks that those are important topics? So hopefully that makes some sense, but what I want to do now is just give you some tips that we found to be able to use entity SEO, or the idea or the underlying concept of an entity-based or topic-based approach to optimization and to content writing, to better improve that SEU, that search engine understanding metric. How can we make Google better understand and better report entities that we think are important in our content? Because we think that that ultimately is what is going to give you power over the long term. Well, here's one thing that we found that I think is quite clever, and not always doesn't always work. But if you go to the Google API page on Google and type in, "When I bake bread, I need dough," if you type that in grammatically correct, with a small b and a small d, it will not pick up those Wikipedia articles that you can see in that screenshot here. But if you capitalize B and you capitalize D, it understands bread as a topic, as an entity, and it understands dough as a topic or as an entity, and it would actually link to the Wikipedia article. So using capitals cleverly can help Google understand that you think that this is an entity that is important. Do be careful though, it doesn't work all of the time. If you also capitalize need in here, then you've capitalized everything, and Google then doesn't know which ones are important and which ones aren't. So this actual grammatically incorrect sentence, by capitalizing things unnecessarily, actually helps Google, but if you overdo it, Google just gives up and doesn't give you any credit whatsoever. But that's tip number one. Use capitals cleverly. Tip numbers 2, 3, 4, and 5. Disambiguate entities that you use in your content. So if you're using AA in your content, say whether it's Automobile Association or Alcoholics Anonymous, for example. So try and make sure that Google can't get your content wrong. A very interesting example that that our systems often get wrong actually is engine. So engine can be a combustion engine or can be a search engine in our world, and it's very easy to get it wrong. In fact, it's quite hard to get it right sometimes. So if you can disambiguate entities in your content, then that is really helpful to a search engine to try and make sure that it understands your entity, the correct entity, in the correct context. Talking about context, you can use context, or you can add context in your content so that Google understands the topic in a sentence. So what I mean here is e-commerce sites often fail. You've just got a list of products and there's no context. Another category of marketing that is very difficult online in organic search is actually the casinos, because the casinos have slot machines that are called things like, the Klondike Gold, or the treasures of the Pharaoh, or whatever it may be. And of course they're evoking emotion, which is fine for getting gamblers to part with their cash, but they're using phrases and terminology which doesn't sit well within the context of gambling and gaming. So a search engine quite often will bypass all of that content or misunderstand that content, and so that's quite a hard challenge for the gaming industry. But if you can add context so that Google understands the topic in a sentence, then that's going to help Google to better understand your underlying meaning. Third one, a page about one topic is much easier for a machine to understand and actually for them to use than having a page that's about many topics. And so we've seen that if people are specific in their content and it's clear what the meaning is, then it's easier for a search engine or a natural language processing algorithm to extract the underlying meaning and see what meaning is the most important topics within a piece of content. Whereas if you're talking about a lot of things, it breaks it down and it becomes quite difficult. And there's a lot of research about chunking and other ideas as well around trying to break those ideas. And we may have passage indexing coming up later in 2021, where Google has given up on trying to look at a page and meaning within a page, and they'll break it down to passages. But if you've already broken your ideas down into entities, and then you're going to be a lot better off. So a page about one topic is easier for a machine to understand and use than a page about many topics. And then you can help that again by internally linking mentions of any important topics that you have on a piece of content to the main page that you have about that topic. So if you've clearly got a page about one individual topic, you can still talk about it everywhere else, but you can internally link that idea into the main topic. And if you want to automate that, then of course Inlinks will help you do that, and that's one of the things that we love to do. The last tip is that there is a useful bit of schema that we can use to help our content get picked up at the entity level by search engines. So this is the syntax of it. This is actually a French example where we use the about tag within schema.org and the mentions tag. So in this particular article, we're saying that this page is about a thing called woman, and a thing called bags and bijoux and bracelets. So it's a number of search terms, and it's about these things. It also mentions these other things as well, like diamonds and other concepts. But those mentions are subservient to the main central themes of the page. In this case, I would say possibly it's about too many things, but we can at least say that it is about these entities, and we can use this relationship with Wikipedia to say to Google that this is about this concept in Wikipedia. And we know that Google started their machine learning by using Wikipedia as a training set. So if we can find a direct match there, then we can very much get that association going. So that's about it. If you would like to have this presentation, email talk@dixonjones.com with the word entity in the title. I'm going to be around now for some questions, assuming you're seeing this live, and I would love it if you ask some questions. I'll try and answer anything I can to do with entities, or with my past life of links or semantic SEO. And thank you very much for your time.